One of the most insane and violent comics ever made is officially getting a live-action adaptation. And of course, the author behind it is none other than Garth Ennis, the same guy who created another brutally explicit comic that blew up on Amazon. But here's the thing, Crossed makes that series look tame in comparison, which is why the news that this comic is getting adapted feels almost unbelievable. The Crossed universe is one of the most grotesque things I've ever seen. A world consumed by a mysterious and very violent virus only known as the C virus. No one knows its origin, only its horrifying effects. Those infected lose every shred of humanity, carrying out the most vile acts imaginable: cannibalism, torture, depravity beyond comprehension. And unlike most apocalyptic stories that cling to a spark of hope, Crossed offers none, just a slow, brutal descent into madness. Now, considering Garth Ennis' track record with The Boys and Preacher both being adapted into live action, it's not too surprising that Crossed is getting the same treatment. But the real question is, just how much of its relentless violence can actually make it to the big screen? Thankfully, or maybe terrifyingly, we already have a hint of what to expect, thanks to the director attached to the project, Rob Jabbaz. His 2021 film The Sadness is widely regarded as one of the most violent horror movies ever made, and just like The Crossed, it's about a virus that transforms people into monsters, stripping away their humanity and unleashing their darkest, most sadistic urges. Set in Taiwan, The Sadness follows a couple trying to survive the Alvin virus outbreak, which honestly feels like a cinematic relative to the Crossed virus. And surprisingly enough, Rob Jabbaz has openly said that The Sadness was inspired directly by the Crossed comics, so if you've seen The Sadness, you already know just how far a live-action Crossed could push things. As for the adaptation, there's no official release date yet, though speculation points to sometime in 2026 next year. What we do know comes from a few now deleted behind the scenes posts from actors involved in the project. The cast includes Devin Druitt from 13 Reasons Why, Ash Santos from American Horror Story, and Ethan Jones Romero from Law & Order. Interestingly, all of the characters are pulled straight from the original Cross series, which of course suggests the film will follow the first 10-issue run, published between 2008 and 2010. So without wasting any more time, let's dive into one of the most bizarre, violent, and graphic stories ever unleashed from the twisted mind of Garth Ennis. We're introduced to the horrific world of Crossed, the real monologue by the protagonist of the original run, Stan, as he recounts the night of the outbreak. He specifically mentions YouTube, pointing out how quick people were to label shocking videos as fake, things that look too graphic, too horrific to be real. People dismissed them not out of logic, but because the alternative was too disturbing to accept. According to Stan, it was easier for most people to write it off as staged and just move on with their lives until it was too late. As Stan continues his thoughts, he reflects on how unprepared people were, how everyone's guard was always down. No one could have predicted the scale of what was coming. And while he narrates this, we're shown a blood-covered man walking into the diner, casually carrying what looks like a human spine. And this is only a little preview of what the Crossed are capable of, and it's really not that pretty. I mean, the Crossed are literally batshit insane if you haven't already noticed. The first person brave or naive enough to speak up is the owner, Jim, who jokes, "Don't you think it's a little too early to be dressing up for Halloween?" He tries to reason with the blood-covered man, not realizing yet that the reasoning is useless. That's when Sydney, a worker at Jim's diner, tries to interject. She tries to warn Jim, but he brushes her off and continues confronting the stranger. Then all of a sudden, without any warning, Jim's nose is completely ripped off by the man. The blood-covered, crazy man has bitten Jim's nose off. Without hesitation, Sydney takes the hot coffee pot in her hand and smashes it across the blood-covered man's face, knocking him to the floor. This is the first interaction with the Crossed. Before anyone can process what's just happened or call for help, help does arrive, but not the kind they were expecting. A police cruiser crashes outside the diner. Slumped over across the shattered windshield is a Crossed infected officer, clearly dead, his head twisted at a grotesque angle, but still he's smiling even while dead. Panic ensues and everyone rushes out of the diner, but there's no time to breathe. The cop car bursts into flames. Stan watches it burn, and inside, across the scene holding a struggling victim in a headlock. Before Stan can fully comprehend what he's seeing, the flames engulf them both. A small crowd of bystanders gathers around the burning wreck. Stan turns to a nearby man, who we'll later know as Thomas, and asks if he saw what had just happened. Thomas almost sarcastically replies, "Dude, how could I not?" But there's no time to process anything. A girl nearby shouts and points to the sky. A plane is flying way too low. It clips a chunk off a clock tower, and for a brief moment we get a glimpse inside. Inside the cockpit, the pilot is infected with the C virus and laughing maniacally, while the crew behind him is being torn apart by even more Crossed mid-flight. The girl who pointed out the plane, her name is Kelly, and she's another character we'll follow throughout the run. Stan, still reeling in from the chaos, narrates how everything was happening way too fast, too brutally. He just needed a minute to catch his breath, something no one really gets in the Crossed universe. As he's lying on the ground dazed, he happens to be facing away from a massive nuclear explosion that goes off in the distance. It's miles away but close enough to feel the aftershock. The worst part about this is that mostly everyone is facing away from the blast, except for Kelly, who becomes blinded by it. And being honest, being blinded by a nuke is possibly one of the worst ways to start any apocalypse, especially a Crossed one, where the world is filled with homicidal maniacs and violating anything that comes in their way. It's like one of those ridiculous Project Zomboid challenge videos, like the Helen Keller challenge videos that people do. Anyways, as the chaos continues, Stan's narration reflects on how nobody really knew how or why it all started. He wonders if the nukes were launched by a foreign nation, but eventually through a grim revelation, he accepts the more disturbing truth that the Crossed themselves likely dropped the bombs in their endless pursuit of inflicting suffering on others. Stan recalls a later conversation he'll have with Sydney, where she brings up the idea that this could all be God's judgment. And honestly, in the Crossed universe, it's not really a wild theory. After all, these infected maniacs are literally marked with a red cross-shaped rash on their face, and they seem hell-bent on tormenting not just the living, but even other Crossed. And what exactly does Stan have to say to that? He says, like God makes any fucking sense at all. And in the bleak, pitch-black Cross style of humor, Sydney replies, it does if he's a cocksucker. Stan pauses and admits, maybe she has a point. Returning back to the night, the trio, Stan, Thomas, and Kelly, stand together watching the mushroom cloud rising in the distance. Around them, all hell has broken loose. Crossed are doing unspeakable things in the background, things that only scratch the surface of what we'll see in future issues. And yet, amid the bloodshed and explosions, one moment stands out. Sydney remains calm. While everyone else is panicking, she's eerily composed. She flips on the TV to check the news, only to watch a reporter get torn apart live on camera. She doesn't scream, she doesn't cry, she just stares mildly disturbed, but still collected. And that's something that defines her throughout the story. In a world built entirely on madness, Sydney remains one of the few truly stable people, which makes what happens in the very next issue hit even harder. Let's just say what unfolds there is something so disturbing, so gut-wrenching, and it all happens because of one man's delusion with salt. Crossed issue 1 opens 10 months after the events at the diner. Stan and Sydney are scouting a nearby town from a hilltop, and what they see is nothing short of hell. Crossed roam the streets, indulging in sadistic violence to say the least. Two of them, barely clothed, drag a screaming naked woman off to God knows where. Another one, missing a hand, uses his remaining one to stab someone repeatedly with a fork. The town is a rotting corpse, broken down buildings, silence drenched in misery. If this is what the rest of the world looks like, then hope is already extinct. We also meet Patrick, Sydney's young son, who's sitting nearby. Stan notes that Patrick is always close to Sydney, never out of earshot. As we'll later find out, Sydney doesn't trust anyone else in the group to protect her son. She's seen what people are capable capable of, even the good guys. And Stan honestly agrees with her. As they make their way back to the group, Stan mentions how someone had the idea early on to shut down all cell service to prevent the Crossed from communicating. It might sound pointless, aren't the Crossed mindless monsters? But that's what makes them so terrifying. They're not. They retain memories, knowledge, skills. If someone knew how to fly a plane or drive a tank before they turned, they still know how to do it after. But now with a single purpose, pure destruction. Cutting communication may not have saved the world, but at least it stopped them from coordinating mass murders via text or call. After their 20-mile trek from the group's hideout in a secluded cave, Stan and Sydney returned with nothing. No supplies, no leads. Just more confirmation that the world outside is still screwed. As they sit around in a circle with the others, including Thomas and Kelly from the prologue, Stan eats and reflects on a man he once knew, an ex-Marine. The Marine used to refer to the apocalypse as a global clusterfuck, a term Stan much prefers. The guy had a philosophy too. He liked when things got serious, when there were no masks left, and survival meant confronting the worst truths about yourself. But even that hardened soldier didn't make it. The Crossed caught him, made him eat his own eyes out, and then, quote for quote, started in on him for real. Stan had to hide in a ditch nearby while it happened. The world they live in now is brutal in every sense. No fresh food, no hygiene, and something that Stan fears is the thought of having some weird chemical be in the air. Who knows what biological weapons the Crossed have access to. And to top it all off with the worst part, the Crossed move in hordes, often better armed than survivors. Stan says it's smarter to lie still, wait for them to pass, and if you're lucky, loot the bodies they leave behind. That's life now for our survivors. As Stan's monologue trails off, we shift focus to a man named Joel. Sitting with his wife and daughter, he tells a story, one that seems hopeful, but quickly unravels. While fleeing from a Crossed, Joel had jumped into a giant pile of table salt. The Crossed followed him and started choking on the salt. Joel thinks it was dying. As he's finishing up his story, he holds up a 10-pound bag of table salt, like it's some kind of holy relic, saying salt might be the answer they've all been waiting for, but no one's buying it. Everyone here looks absolutely miserable. Kelly, still blind from the nuclear blast, calls Joel out. She says it sounds like wishful thinking. Joel tries to justify himself, saying she wasn't there, and if she was, she couldn't see. Stan scoffs, classy. Kelly makes a fair point. If you dump salt in anyone's face, infected or not, of course they'd scream or choke. Jeff, one of the older group members, points out a hole in Joel's story. First he's saying the Crossed choked. Now he's saying that it screamed. So which one was it exactly? Joel is fumbling for hope, and in this world, hope is usually a lie. Stan voices what everyone else is thinking. Joel's salt theory is just a pipe dream, about as real as the fantasy games Joel used to play. He even feels sorry for him. Joel keeps pushing, desperate to believe that there is a way to fight back, that maybe they don't have to keep running forever. But Kelly shuts it down hard. If he tests that theory, he'll be gambling with his daughter's life. Joel's wife Amy finally steps in, reminding him that their daughter Arwen, a name from Lord of the Rings, needs food. She's growing thinner every day. The conversation ends with Joel's final broken question. What's the point? If we can't fight back, what can we do? Sydney, tucking Patrick into bed, gives the only answer that still makes sense in the Crossed universe. All we can do is survive. Stan steps out of the cave to relieve Thomas from lookout duty. Thomas asks how's Sydney. Stan replies that she's okay, or at least he thinks she is. Deep down, he knows everyone's terrified that she might leave them. And then we jump back to the night it all went wrong, right after the diner. Stan, Thomas, and Kelly are crouched behind a fence, trying to stay out of sight. They don't know what's happening, just that maniacs are tearing through the streets. A nuclear explosion has gone off, and Kelly is now blind. They've been running non-stop for 20 minutes. Suddenly the fence breaks down. A female Crossed lunges at Stan, screaming profanities, a large knife jutting from her back. But she's grinning the whole entire time. Just as she gets close, a truck smashes through the fence and crushes her spine. It's Sydney. She tells the trio to get in if they're coming, and to make it fast. Thomas helps Kelly into the truck bed, careful and gentle. Stan jumps into the passenger seat, where he meets Patrick for the first time. They were all strangers before tonight. Stan may have recognized Sydney from the diner, but now they're thrown together, forced to survive. Stan thanks Sydney for saving their asses. And as Sydney's driving, she hits a cross, sending him flying over the truck. Stan notices something wrong with Sydney's ear. Panic and what he's witnessed tonight makes him blunt. He asks Sydney unfazed, "What's wrong with her ear?" She says her husband once held her head to a stovetop. Stan says, "I'm sorry." Sydney says, not as sorry as he was, implying that she probably did worse to him. We return to the present. Stan wakes up to find Kittrick. Another member of the group has spotted people down the hill, heading toward the hideout. No one's willing to risk finding out whether they're human or crossed, but given their luck, it's most likely the crossed. Sydney, being basically the leader of the group, gives them 2 minutes to head out, not wanting to take any chances at all. The group quickly moves uphill, abandoning the cave. From a distance, Stan gets a clearer look. It's at least 20 of them, and they're definitely crossed. They run. You never confront the crossed unless you want to die in the worst way imaginable. Torture, mutilation, humiliation. Their violence makes people call the crossed comics nothing more than torture porn. And it's not an unfair label, because this series gets pretty crazy later on. And boy, is it about to get crazy right now. As they flee, Joel's wife Amy breaks her ankle while holding their daughter, Arwen. Desperate, Amy begs Joel to shoot her, to end it before the crossed get her. Joel refuses. Instead, he gets an idea, one he thinks is smarter. He makes a circle of salt around them, hoping it'll protect them, hoping superstition has power in this really absurd apocalypse. The crossed reach them. They pause at the salt circle. They look weirdly at Joel. Joel is drenched in sweat, and then comes one of the most infamous panels in all of Crossed. The salt circle obviously doesn't work. Arwen is hacked to pieces. Amy and Joel are both assaulted in ways too vile to describe in this video. Amy, missing a chunk of her head, barely alive, screams at Joel, "Look what the fuck you did." Jesus. Their deaths aren't quick. The crossed never let them be. Back to the rest of Sydney's group, Stan raises his binoculars, about to look. Sydney stops him. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," she says. Crossed Issue 2 opens up with a new character, Randall. Randall updates us on how the rest of the states are, and they're not doing so good. New York has flooded, and Manhattan streets have turned into rivers, and Texas has been burning for a while. The Texas Inferno came from overloaded failsafes and refinery explosions. Randall had met the group after traveling from the south. When he came across them, he offered them shelter in exchange for some food, and now he rests with the group in a house powered by a small generator, quiet enough to avoid any unwanted attention by the crossed. Kittrick returns from keeping watch on the area, reporting the area clear. Sydney checks on Jeff, who hasn't been himself lately, ever since the whole entire salt incident with Joel and his family. What a horrible fate. Randall explains he's seen other survivor groups fall apart, no matter how solid their plan seemed. His own personal idea is to head northwest toward Alaska, isolated, sparsely populated, and with weather harsh enough to deter the crossed. Canada, however, is on his list of places to avoid. Early on in the outbreak, Canadian forces focused on defending the US border. The Canadians initially thought that the crossed infection was only the US's problem. Unaware to the Canadians, the crossed infection was everybody's problem, including theirs. The C virus had already breached the rear. The military was overrun, leaving tanks and heavy weaponry in the hands of crossed soldiers. Stan doubts a cross could operate such machinery, but Randall insists they still retain old skills, just with a sadistic twist. Randall describes the scene he witnessed on Interstate 81, cross-dragging another infected from a vehicle, ripping off its limbs, and then eating him. And there's a crossed using his leg for sexual pleasure. All while the cross that's being tortured, he's laughing while this whole entire thing is happening. Also, something that happens that I left out of my script is that Stan and Thomas are playing a game of chess. And while they're playing a game of chess, to show that their friendship is strong through this apocalypse, they're telling each other, "fuck you," but in a friendly manner, of course. After Sydney returns from checking on Jeff, she has some bad news. He buried the bones of the home's previous owners, a sentimental act that risks drawing cross attention. Sydney gives the group 2 minutes to leave before any of the cross attention comes their way. Jeff tries to apologize, but Sydney cuts him off. That's why there's not 23 of us anymore. Even trying to do a kind act like this in the crossed apocalypse results usually in a bad outcome. And while the group is leaving the house, suddenly Randall is shot by a distant cross sniper. The group then flees into the woods. The next scene we see, the group has set up camp in the middle of the woods at night. They tend to Randall's shot shoulder and confirm luckily that there's no sign of infection. While tending to Randall's injuries, Sydney asks Stan if the crossed have been using dogs to track them. Stan hasn't heard any dogs, so he thinks that they haven't got any on them. Stan then recalls that he hasn't seen the crossed with any dogs in a while, which makes him think that the crossed ate the poor dogs. However, at the very moment, there's another problem with the group. It's that Jeff has been beating himself up ever since he dug up those bodies and basically got Randall shot. He's now sitting out in the pouring rain, increasing his chances of getting sick. And right now, the group barely has any medical supplies to treat any infections or illnesses. So Sydney tells Stan to go check on Jeff and try to get him back inside to stay nice and warm. A flashback takes us to a day and a half after the diner attack. Stan, Thomas, Sydney, and Patrick sit by their truck, overlooking the ruins of a nearby shopping center. Kelly sleeps in the bed of the truck, still blinded from the nuclear explosion. It's been 38 hours since the blast, and she can't even tell light from dark still. Her chances of recovery right now look very slim. Stan uses the moment to pry into Sydney's background, find out why she's so level-headed during this whole entire madness. She denies any military past, focuses on watching over Patrick, and tells Stan not to cuss in front of him, and explains that the rifle she carries comes from her grandfather, who also taught her how to use it. When Stan guesses her husband's out of the picture, she shuts down the topic, and instead points out to the radios and that they've been silent, meaning the crossed have likely wiped out most of the uninfected. She says anyone not bitten either bugged out early or got killed. Stan reacts to her mention of bitten like it's a zombie cliche, like it's out of a zombie movie, but Sydney says it's exactly that simple. One bite or contact with any bodily fluid from a crossed and you turn. Before Stan can ask any more questions, Thomas spots something falling from the sky. Bodies slam into the shopping center's parking lot, dumped from a passing plane. Sydney tells them to get back under cover. Stan asks how she can stay so calm. Sydney tells Stan, ever get fucked by life slick? Happens to me all the time. I can guess by Sydney saying this that this is just another bad day for her. Returning back to the present, Randall has slipped into a coma from his gunshot wound. Thankfully, there's still no sign of any infection, but caring for someone such as Randall as he is in his current state can be quite burdensome in a crossed apocalypse. Stan and Sydney decide to scout the old house where they used to stay at before Jeff buried those bodies. Stan offers to give Patrick a piggyback ride, which obviously is accepted. On the way, he apologizes about Randall. Sydney brushes it off. Why tell me? Her only focus is Patrick's safety. As they move out, Stan and Thomas give each other a friendly exchange, a friendly gesture of a middle finger. Near the house they used to stay at before, Stan and Sydney find a circle of crossed playing the biscuit game. And to best explain the biscuit game, if you don't know what it is already, we have this quote from Stan. They stand around in a circle and, you know, over a biscuit, except when the Brits say biscuit, they mean cookie. But you get the idea. The last to arrive has to eat the cookie. But this group of crossed isn't arriving over any cookie or biscuit. It's a bowl full of bullets. Sydney, horrified, realizes what this means. The shot that hit Randall was likely coated with their semen, deliberately used to infect him. They hurry back to camp. However, it's too late. Randall wakes up with a cross-shaped rash carved into his skin. He attacks the man who was keeping watch over him, Scott, then stalks toward Kelly, taunting her with vile threats. You know, just normal crossed profanities. Thomas yells for her to run. Thomas and Kittrick fire at Randall, but miss or only graze him. They're really bad shots. Kelly runs towards Stan's voice, who now tells her to run near him, just as Sydney steps in and puts a round clean through Randall's head. That shot that Sydney fired will draw more crossed, forcing the group to retreat once again. As the group moves on, Stan wonders if the crossed are getting smarter. Sydney disagrees disagrees. I think there's just 1,000 kinds of mean. With no clear direction except to avoid the infected, Sydney finally says they'll stop for the night. And in the morning, they need to start planning for Alaska. Issue 3 opens up with the group in a really bad situation. Stan points out the obvious, saying that they're also screwed, as nearby a horde of cross looks for them. Sydney raises her hand to her mouth and shushes Stan, looking as calm as usual, while most of the group are behind Stan, Sydney, and Patrick, taking cover behind a bus. A cross nearly notices Stan, but its attention alongside the group of cross are taken away by something else, by another source of prey. At least now, our group of survivors aren't being hunted. Stan's monologue tells us that usually after close calls like that, the group would wait at least 2 hours minimum before moving, buying enough time to make sure that the crossed were fully out of the area. However, this time it would be 4, as they heard shots go off and sounds of engines. Then again, they waited 2 more hours. Sydney, of course, made this decision to wait out the cross for so long, made sure they took all the precautions to survive. When the group finally does scavenge around the town, everything has been absolutely picked clean, except when an unnamed survivor sees a can of food on top of a suspicious pile of broken wooden planks. And while rereading the cross, I'm not sure if this unnamed survivor is ever given a name, but for a little spoiler alert, we'll find out that Stan doesn't keep names of people he doesn't think are important. When the unnamed survivor does go to reach for the can in the middle of the street, Jeff calls out to the man not to go out in the street and to stay in cover. And of course, as the man does reach for the can, it's revealed as soon as he steps over the pile of wood that underneath is a bear trap which traps the man. But he has little time to react as an arrow is shot through him. The group is now in a panic looking for an attacker. Kittrick notices someone on top of a nearby roof, and then the group begins shooting at the attacker. At first, Stan thinks to himself that he's now become a reasonable shot, as everyone else misses theirs, and how at first he had trouble coming to terms with shooting at another human person until he realizes he wasn't. At first, this part confused me a little bit because it's revealed that the attacker isn't a crossed, but rather it's a normal uninfected woman, which brings me back to what Stan said earlier, where he realizes he wasn't shooting another human being, implying that this now woman attacker is somehow possibly worse than a crossed, which we'll find out soon enough. The attacker, after falling from the rooftop, is now heavily injured from the bullet from Stan and of course the fall. Sydney orders Jeff, Kittrick, and Patrick to get up on the roof to look for any oncoming signs of trouble. Coming out of a nearby alleyway, a group of kids appear, calling out to leave the woman alone. As the group readies their guns, Stan tells them to stop, and that they're just kids and not crossed. The injured woman begs the group not to harm the children. She tells them that she's their kindergarten teacher, Miss Cook, and that she has a safe place nearby with medical supplies. When Stan asks why she attacked their fellow survivor, she explains that she did it to keep him from screaming. Trap, shoot, no noise, no crossed. She admits she shouldn't have gone after a group as large as theirs, but the kids were starving. The implication is clear. The trap wasn't for crossed at all. It was for other survivors. One of the kids yells, "Don't you dare hurt Miss Cook." Miss Cook leads the group to her hideout under a bridge, in a small sewer utility room. They tend to her injuries as best as they can, since Scott was the only paramedic in their group, but we all know what happened to Scott last issue. Sydney questions whether she taught the children how to use traps and bows. Miss Cook admits she did, both for protection and for hunting human food. She acknowledges how terrible that sounds, but insists it's not the kids' fault. "What else was I supposed to do?" she asks. Sydney coldly answers, "Not this." Miss Cook then tells her story. When the outbreak began, she saved as many of her students as she could. As food ran out and stores emptied, the kids began to starve. They encountered 3 different survivor groups, but none had any food left to spare. Eventually, a lone man stumbled upon them. After he insulted her, Miss Cook snapped, thinking only of the kids. It was winter, there was no food, and one thing led to another. They killed and ate him, and it didn't stop there. Nearly a year into the apocalypse, they had likely eaten countless survivors. Sydney confirms this, Thomas, saying it must have gotten easier each time. Miss Cook simply replies, "It was all there was." From that moment, Sydney quietly designates the children as a threat and tells Patrick to get away from the other kids and come near her. And now the story flashes back. After Sydney had made the wise decision to ditch their truck earlier, the highway ahead is a wreck, filled with cross and a chaotic, brutal scene. Sydney says with that many cross that they're in for trouble. Stan starts to say with that many bitten we're Before cussing, he remembers Sydney doesn't want him swearing around Patrick. Good job, Stan. Good job. Nearby, Kelly calls for Thomas. When he asks if she's okay or if she needs any water, she says something straight out of the early 2000s. "I'm blind, not regarded." Thomas tries reassuring her about her blindness, but she replies sarcastically that her blindness is taking its time wearing off. She admits they barely know each other, but asks him to promise to look after her. In this heartfelt moment, Thomas agrees. Stan thanks Sydney for saving them twice over now. She tells them that surviving is about deciding, acting, and never looking back. If you get curious, you get killed. She refuses his thanks, calling him Slick, a nickname she likes to use for Stan. And going back to Kelly and Thomas, Kelly says, "Really?" Thomas says, "Honestly, I really do." Before they're interrupted, a police officer appears, gun drawn at them, ordering them not to move. He knows that they're not crossed, but still demands Sydney's rifle. As they're being led by the police officer, Stan questions Sydney, "Where's her pistol?" Sydney tells Stan, "Just see how it plays out." The officer leads them to other survivors he's gathered. Among them are Jeff, Joel, and Joel's family. Sydney notices someone in the back of the officer's cruiser and asks who it is. "Prisoner," he says coldly. The officer tells the group that he got his prisoner on the night of the outbreak, pulled him out of the wreckage unconscious. At first he thought it was a DUI, but then the ambulance never showed up. There's something clearly off about this officer. Jeff says the officer has been under an awful lot of pressure. Sydney sarcastically replies, "I'll say." Back in the present, the group debates what to do about the cannibal kids. It's revealed Miss Cook has since died, covered by a blanket from Jeff. Outside, Kittrick quietly cries to himself. His reasons unknown for now, but hinted to be tragic. Thomas asks if Sydney is really planning to kill the kids. She says it needs to be done. Jeff argues that they should honor Miss Cook's wishes, but Sydney dismisses him. Kelly unexpectedly sides with Sydney. Thomas is shocked by this. Kelly says the kids can't be rehabilitated. If left alone, they'll either starve, be hunted by Crossed, or keep killing other survivors. Sydney refuses to let them be near Patrick, and her decision is final as she's essentially the group's leader. When Stan asks how they're going to do it, Sydney tells him to take the group and Patrick outside and give her 2 minutes. But as he leaves, he realizes he can't let her bear this burden alone. Without a word, he joins her. The least he can do for Sydney after she saved his life is help her carry out this morally ambiguous act. And without saying a word to each other, Stan and Sydney take out the children while they plead and cry for their lives. Stan thinks to himself he didn't imagine the people that they've killed. He didn't entertain the idea of a last-minute scenario where a miracle comes out of thin air that saves everyone. Instead, he finally accepts the fact that the world would never be going back to normal. When it's done, Sydney tells him she appreciates his help. They both stand over the bodies in grim silence. Frost issue 4 opens up less chaotically than the last. Though the cover art of any comic issue may not have any relevancy to what's actually inside the contents, this one teases two grotesque Cross will eventually meet. But for now, the group has taken shelter in an abandoned apartment building, discussing their plan to head toward Alaska. They'll need to make a stop in Denver before crossing the Rockies, gathering as many supplies as possible before braving through the mountains. Cindy voices her dislike for cities, but the reality is grim. Smaller towns have been completely scavenged, and the group is still recovering from the psychological weight of killing children. Stan reflects there's no real way to justify what they did, even if you could consider it an act of mercy. At the end of the day, they still killed children. The scene closes with Stan relieving Kittrick from watch duty. Kittrick thanks him quietly. And if you're still watching the video at this point, consider this the exact point of no return in terms of how much insanity is going to be shown or told, because in the very next moment in this issue, we'll meet a reoccurring threat, and he goes by a name so vile, and it's quite literal: Meat Horsecock. And true to his name, he wields exactly what you think, and we we see him using it to smack another crossed while grinning. Stan and Sydney watch from a rooftop as Patrick quietly plays with his toy car in the background. Thank God he's not witnessing any of this. Horsecock sits on top of a truck, surrounded by a few other crossed. Nearby, a group of uninfected human captives sit in a line. It looks as if Horsecock struck the other cross to stop it from attacking a woman, not out of safety or concern of course, but for later torture in their enjoyment. Most of the hostages seem relatively unharmed, just roughed up. Unfortunately, the trucks block the survivors' only route west, where they'll need to go. Crossing the bridge means either slipping past the crossed or waiting them out. Fighting it isn't worth the risk. Casualties would be inevitable, and a detour would cost precious time and resources, things they can't afford to lose. For now, there are only 5 crossed in sight, but something feels off. That's when the two from the cover appear. Stump, a limbless crossed with huge ears, and Face, an old man crossed wearing a man's face as underwear. This is what I meant when we're past the point of no return into this insane apocalypse. I really wonder how much of this is going to be transitioned into the live action. Anyways, Horsecock orders Face and Stump to keep watch out for any survivors, hinting that this group is far more organized and smarter than most crossed we've seen so far. There's a hierarchy here, an unsettling thought for our survivors. Stan and Sydney watch as the crossed push their hostages into the back of another truck. Horsecock tosses a bucket of knives in after them. Whatever's happening inside is pure chaos. Cindy comments that there's a strange kind of restraint here. They're not killing their captives immediately. Stan doesn't like how methodical they are. We return to the past once again, to the group's encounter with the police officer, now revealed to have a crossed prisoner locked in the back of his cruiser. The officer tells Sydney he's keeping it alive for interrogation, claiming the crossed knows things about his wife. While Sydney speaks with him, Stan talks to Jeff, who explains that the officer once tried giving the crossed some water, only for it to lunge at him. Back at the police cruiser, the officer said the crossed said terrible things about his wife, things they were doing to her, other crossed. It said that the officer couldn't stop them no matter what he did, and when he returned home, he only found his house consumed by flames. He thinks that the crossed might have some sort of paranormal powers. Sydney, unmoved, points out that the prisoner doesn't even know his wife's name. It probably guessed he was married from the ring on his finger, and only said terrible things about his wife to agitate him. Meanwhile, Patrick asked Stan if he could give away his yogurt. He overheard that Joel's daughter, Arwen, hasn't eaten anything. Patrick offers the yogurt cup to Joel's wife, who accepts it gratefully. What a nice, kind act from Patrick. Sydney advises the officer to execute the crossed prisoner before it escapes and kill someone, but the officer is still clinging to the old world's ideals, insisting on upholding the law and keeping his infected prisoner alive. His voice rises as he shouts at Sydney. She warns him not to yell and not to scare her son. The prisoner begins to snicker. The officer, now infuriated, steps closer to the prisoner, threatening him. The prisoner starts singing a crude song about his wife, drawing the officer even nearer. Then the prisoner smiles and spits at him. Contact with infected bodily fluid seals the officer's fate. Though at least this time, thankfully, it's not from the infamous biscuit game. Panic sets in. The officer fires wildly, bullets snapping past Sydney and into the air. She seizes the moment to draw her hidden pistol and shoot the crossed prisoner in the back of the cruiser. As the gunfire fades and the group takes cover, it becomes clear the officer has already turned to crossed. Cindy doesn't even hesitate. She puts him down instantly. Without missing a beat, she orders Stan to check every car for medical supplies, food, or water. They have to move quickly as the gunfire will draw in even more crossed. She tells the group that they only have 2 or 3 minutes and gives them one final warning: don't touch the bodies or the blood. Returning back to the present, we get some insight on a survivor we haven't really talked about, that being Sheena. The first group that Sheena was part of consisted mostly of cops and firefighters. They tried to understand a crossed by tying one to a chair. They tried beating it until it told them where exactly did the virus come from. But being this far in the story, we know that the crossed can be reasoned with or negotiated with. So Sheena was the only survivor of that group. And now returning to our main group of survivors, they decide on what to do exactly about Horsecock's group and how to get around them. Jeff wonders if Horsecock's group's leadership means that they're evolving. Sheena says that if they can learn, they can reason. But Stan counters that their nature remains unchanged. They just get more creative with their fun. fun in violent ways. Kelly adds, what if they're like people? Some cross can learn just like people, while others just act on their impulses. Jeff grimly notes if crossed learn to hide and wait like survivors, they'll be even more dangerous. Cindy shifts gears, sharing the plan to sneak past Horsecock's group at night. The next scene exactly shows that. The group has successfully slipped past the crossed, but now they must cross a broken bridge by balancing on a narrow beam. Thomas tests the beam, warning it's loose. Most make it across, with Jeff, Kelly, and Sheena last. Despite Thomas's promise to keep Kelly safe, they don't cross together. That's just something that I added. It's a little funny. Now you have to remember that Horsecock's group is really close by. In Stump, the crossed earlier that's missing all of his limbs and has super huge ears, apparently has super hearing as well. And with his super hearing, Stump detects them, alerting Horsecock's group. Cindy urges them to hurry and tells Patrick to stay behind her. Jeff helps Kelly across, but Sheena's luck runs out when the beam breaks under her. As Cindy and Stan exchange fire with the crossed, Cindy asks Sheena if she wants her to mercy kill her, because Horsecock's group is really close and he's running towards her with a big smile on his face. Sheena refuses and decides to decide her own fate. She lets go, falling to her death. The rest escape without further incident. Horsecock's group can only curse at them, calling Stan a four-eyed fuck, and vowing to get Cindy and Patrick, the brat and the bitch. Cindy sarcastically tells Stan, nice to feel wanted again, huh, as they flee. Crossed issue 5 opens up with the group having finally reached the Rockies. It's been a month since they set out from the bridge, and now winter has finally settled in, brutally cold and merciless. Still, there's an upside. They haven't seen another human in a month, and it's been a week since spotting a pack of crossed. Their current strategy is working, moving through the mountains in the snow and avoiding any contact at all costs. The landscape is utterly desolate. In one panel, skeletal remains lie half buried in the snow. Thomas, trying to lighten the mood, comments on how beautiful it all is. The ivory sky, the soft snowfall. He wishes that Kelly could see. Although Kelly is blind, she enjoys the sensation of snowflakes landing on her face, describing them as cool little kisses. Thomas says the world is still good, at least the natural world. Humanity is still a mess, but maybe there's still hope for their group. Stan, however, notices Kittrick looking absolutely miserable. He points it out to Sydney, saying Kittrick doesn't seem to have much will to live anymore. More likely, Stan suspects he's sick with the flu. With little medical supply left and no safe towns nearby, the last two they passed still had lights on, and they're avoiding any contact at all costs. Scavenging isn't an option. Jeff also has the flu, but unlike Kittrick, he's keeping up with his own care. Stan tries to find his own silver lining. The atmosphere is still intact, the air is still breathable. He's surprised that the crossed haven't had fun with nuclear warheads by now. Cindy suggests that detonating a nuke or destroying a nuclear power plant isn't as simple as pressing a button. Someone must have taken precautions to prevent such disasters. The government might have failed in containing the outbreak, but even they weren't reckless enough to give the crossed a chance to end the world. Stan recalls what he learned from a CNN reporter traveling north. In one incident, a Pakistani jet bombed Delhi, but India, showing massive restraint, didn't retaliate. The Middle East, however, wasn't so fortunate. All the nukes that Israel had all detonated at once, basically wiping out the entire Middle East. Stan makes a poorly taste joke here. The group finds shelter in a broken down bus while the snowfall grows heavier. Cindy has suggested it and Stan thanks her. Stan really wants to ask Sydney something, but he hesitates, circling around what he really wants to say. He praises Patrick as a genuinely good kid, not just for Sydney's sake, but because he means it. He asks her how she manages her Ice Woman act. So self-reliant, so protective over Patrick, rarely letting anyone near him. Stan admits he never liked kids much before all of this, but now he's grown fond over Patrick and admires Sydney's parenting. Through all of this madness, Cindy explains that Patrick's father was a dick. Once he was out of the picture, she vowed to protect her son at any cost. Stan teases her, recalling how she once told the group to drive on the decide and act and don't look back, and how she's lived by that motto ever since. Cindy dryly replies that insects are flying thick and fast tonight. Stan says he'll shut up eventually, but one day he'll catch her smiling. It won't be at you, she shoots back. Before leaving to check on Kittrick, she tells him, the moment I relax, that's the moment I'll smile. And now we cut to a flashback, moments after Cindy had shot the officer back in Ishidori. A young man whose name we never learn is horrified. To him, even under these circumstances, she had still killed a cop. Joel reminds him that once the officer was infected, he wasn't a cop anymore. The young man insists that the army will regain control eventually, but Joel has already accepted reality. Looking at the chaos on the highway, he doubts the army or even the world will ever recover, while Jeff quietly tells Joel the young man is just in shock. Jeff's calm demeanor makes him seem like a very sweet old man, with absolutely nothing to hide. Later, Stan and Thomas share a bonding moment during a quick bathroom break in the woods. Stan mentions that on a normal Saturday afternoon, he'd be getting ready for his shift at the Eastern, a place Thomas only visited once. The one time Thomas had gone, he'd overheard a lot of homophobic slurs and didn't take it kindly. Stan admits he learned to tune it out after years of working there, then asks if those kinds of comments bother Thomas. Thomas then says of course they do, I'm gay. Stan is surprised. Thomas explains it's not something you advertise in the heartland of America. He's originally from Austin, Texas, but returned home to take care for his sick mother. Thankfully, she passed away just weeks before the outbreak, and he'd planned to sell the house and leave before everything went to hell. Stan, grinning, asks, are you really gay? Thomas gives him a confused look. Yes? Because your dress sense is absolute shite, Stan deadpans. Thomas bursts out laughing, telling him to screw off. Stan says he likes to spread a little sunshine wherever he goes, to help keep everyone's spirits up. Then he turns serious, telling Thomas they're all better off together, even if survival isn't certain, and that Kelly needs him, and he should act as her guardian. Thomas says, yeah, I get the idea. Back at camp, the group discusses the C virus. Kelly explains that any body fluid from a cross entering another person is enough to infect them. She believes the virus removes the brain's natural inhibitions against committing horrific acts, such as the cross do. Jeff suggests it might also depend on how someone was raised. The young man chimes in with a theory he heard on the radio, that the virus is God's judgment. According to that broadcast, those who aren't saved cross over and become trapped in a living hell, and that the curse is carried in the blood. No one buys it. Kelly says if that were true, it doesn't say much about God, does it? Cindy ends the debate abruptly, telling the group that anyone traveling with her has to do things her way. If they don't like it, they can leave anytime they want, but they'll need to be ready to run and fight at a moment's notice. When they finally move out, the young man asks Stan if he can carry his rifle. Stan, unaware of his intentions, hands it over. That night, the young man takes his own life. Stan admits he never even knew his name, and was even more shocked to realize that he didn't care. It was one of the first harder lessons he learned about survival. Back in the present, Stan and Thomas's friendship is still strong, nearly 10 months into the apocalypse. They joke about who would be worth eating if it came to cannibalism. Kittrick has no meat, and Jeff is flabby, and no fat means no flavor. Kelly laughs, saying at least they can still keep a sense of humor. Cindy isn't amused. She notes Kittrick and Jeff's worsening condition and says bluntly, either they make it or they don't, and leave me out of eating either of them. At sunset, the group camps in the woods. Kittrick and Jeff huddle together for warmth, past any point of modesty. Thomas wishes for something hot to eat, but Stan says they can't risk any fires. Cindy has taken Patrick for a walk up a hill to see the sunset. When an hour passes, Stan goes to find them, worried. When he does find them, Cindy motions for him to be quiet. A pack of wolves is standing nearby. It's a strangely beautiful moment in a series defined by violence and horror. Just a glimpse of wild animals in their natural state. Cindy tells Stan she's never had time to show Patrick things like this. Stan smiles, later telling us this was the closest he'd ever come to believing there might be a reason to survive. It's a thought he never shared with anyone. Cross Issue 6 opens with another reminder of how cruel this world can be. A mutilated horse bolts past in a panic, a severed human leg chained to its side. From behind the cover of thick bushes, the survivors watch in silence. Cindy signals for everyone, including their newest addition Brett, to stay low and still. Trailing the horse comes a pack of Crossed, oblivious to the hidden group. One of them walks along on a broken leg until another spots the weakness and slams a machete into its skull, shearing off part of its head. The injured Crossed collapse, groaning, unable to call out, and lands dangerously low to the survivors, staring right at them. Stan raises his gun to finish it before it can alert others, but Sydney quietly stops him. Moments later, the pack abandons their wounded and moves on. The injured one eventually bleeds out where it fell. The survivors stay hidden for over an hour, unwilling to risk exposure, before finally crawling out from the bush. Brett immediately breaks the silence by mocking Stan, saying he nearly shat himself when the Crossed fell beside him. Stan introduces Brett to us in his own way, calling him the biggest prick he ever met. The group had first encountered him just west of Denver. When he fell out of a tree, Stan almost shot him on sight, until he realized Brett wasn't infected. Brett had a stash of valuable supplies, and in exchange for those, he asked to join them. Smug, abrasive, and constantly pushing buttons, Brett is the kind of person Stan almost wishes he had shot. By the time they cleared the mountains, both Jeff and Kittrick have recovered from the sickness they'd been carrying ever since the whole ordeal in Denver. Jeff was the first to get back on his feet, making sure Kittrick followed soon after. Still, Kittrick's health has been deteriorating for some time, not just physically but mentally, especially since the massacre of the cannibal school children. He no longer takes care of himself, moving through the days in a constant fog of misery. Brett, never one to filter his thoughts, asks aloud what Kittrick's problem is. He says he's never seen anyone so perpetually miserable, before or after the Cross took over. He looks around for anyone to answer, but the group stays silent. Stan then explains that Kittrick suffered the worst loss when everything began. One day, while relaxing at the lake, Kittrick went for a swim as his family stayed on the shore. His wife called out, warning him about a terrifying announcement on the radio, asking if they should pack up and head home, but Kittrick was too far out in the water, watching from a distance, when he saw a strange man approach his family, holding a large knife. Kittrick shouted to get their attention, but before anyone could react, the man walked up to his wife and decapitated her in one clean strike. His two children screamed in terror as more homicidal maniacs closed in. From the water, Kittrick could do nothing but watch as his family was brutally murdered with a shovel, knives, and an axe. Desperate, he swam as fast as he could towards the shore, but the Crossed who killed his wife smiled, waved mockingly, and an armed officer aimed at Kittrick from the bank, laughing. The officer fired, grazing him with a bullet. As Kittrick tried to flee, the killer tossed his wife's head into the lake, forcing him to scream underwater. He managed to escape and didn't return until sunset, where he found what was left of his family, nothing more than a pile of gore. Stan recalls that the first night they met Kittrick, he was a broken man who could barely speak, as he told them what had happened. But the next day, he was different, a hollow shell of himself, and easily the most miserable person in the group, for reasonable reasons. Since then, he's only spoken when absolutely necessary. Back in the present, the group debates the safest route to Alaska. Randall, while he was still alive, warned them that the Canadian border is crawling with Crossed military units, and if they're still organized, no one wants to find out the hard way. His idea had been to take a boat up the coast, but the plan dies instantly. None of them know how to sell. Cindy pushes for avoiding cities entirely. Hugging the coastline, she explains, would trap them between the water and danger, giving them fewer options if something went wrong. Jeff offers an alternative, cutting through the deserts of Utah and Nevada, staying behind the Sierra Nevada range all the way to Oregon. In the open desert, they'd have a clear view for miles, making it harder for trouble to sneak up on them. And since the Crossed don't care for themselves, the brutal heat and lack of resources would be even deadlier for them than for humans. Brett immediately shoots it down, calling the idea a 500-mile suicide march, and insisting the Crossed would follow them no matter what. Stan, never one to pass up the chance for a jab, asks what Brett suggests instead, then sarcastically proposes they wind their way north and defeat enemies with the sheer force of bitching. Brett bristles, reminding everyone how many supplies he gave the group and how they ought to be grateful. Before the argument can escalate any further, Cindy cuts in and decides they're taking the desert route. They've got enough water to make it, and purification tablets for any they find along the way. Brett is stunned they're actually going through with it, and Stan tells him his whining has officially outstayed its welcome. A little extra bite in his tone, Cindy quickly quickly shuts down any more bickering, assigning Stan to take over watch from Thomas. When Thomas hands over his post, he points out the place they'll cross into in Nevada and says water is the only real concern, but Thomas isn't worried. They've already survived the winter in the Rocky Mountains. He's convinced fate has something planned for them besides dehydration. Before heading inside, he mentions casually the dog's back again. Stan settles into his watch and sees the dog, talking to it in the way you might to a pet when no one's around to hear. He teases it for being useless, unable to sniff out any crust, the complete opposite of a miracle dog from the movies, but admits it must have some survival skill to have lasted this long. Not wanting to grow attached, he warns the dog not to get close. He tells it, or maybe himself, that none of them are going to survive this, that they'll lose everything. But the dog just looks at him and wags its tail, the pure, unshakable optimism of something that doesn't know that the world's ended. Stan gives in, reaching out to scratch behind its ears, deciding right then to keep it as his own. For a brief moment, in the middle of all the misery, it's sweet, almost hopeful. But wait, the issue isn't over just yet. The group sits outside at sunset. Patrick has taken a liking to Stan's new dog, but Sydney lays down the rules. Whatever the dog eats comes out of Stan's rations, and if it barks at the wrong time, Stan better be ready to put it down. Patrick also asks Stan what the dog's name is, but Stan lets him decide that. Jeff chimes in, saying that despite humanity being slowly devoured by the Crossed, he's glad to be part of this group, the first real friends he's ever had. Stan asks why an old kind man like Jeff never had any friends before. Jeff hesitates, saying he wasn't really a people person, never had been. Then he asks everyone if they mind him opening up. Stan shrugs free country or what's left of it. Jeff starts cautiously, talking about growing up in a midwestern town, where fitting in was difficult, never connecting with girls and keeping family secrets. At first, Thomas thinks Jeff is just sharing personal struggles, or perhaps coming out of the closet, and encourages him to open up. But then Jeff reveals a much darker truth. He had been luring in young men, torturing and killing them way before the apocalypse, and burying them under his house. The group is horrified. Throughout the whole entire original run, Jeff is pretty much a kind man, basically a stereotypical kind old man, and this plot twist, it kinda got me. And then I remembered Garth Ennis made this comic, and he's pretty much not the master, but he always does insane plot twists that are overly edgy, and so this is kind of expected. Anyways, on the night of the outbreak, Jeff tried to control his urges, but while driving home from work, he saw a drunk man stumbling on the road, and he said it was like it just fell in his lap. He took him home and got his torture devices ready, but before he could torture the man, he turned crossed and almost attacked him. Jeff fled, leaving the man behind. Kelly can't believe it, but Thomas confirms Jeff is telling the truth. Cindy tells Patrick to stay behind her, while Jeff tries to reassure everyone in the group he would never hurt them, that they're all his friends. Everyone is stunned, except for Kittrick, who comforts the now crying Jeff, holding him close. The next day, Kittrick and Jeff go for a walk, and only Kittrick returns. 5 days later, the group moves on and continues their journey through the desert. Issue 7 opens up with Horsecock being back, and this time, he's apparently followed the group through the desert, while singing a song about being bad guys. Cindy and Stan and Patrick watch from a distance. Stan notes, "Now I've seen everything." Stan also asks Sydney if she thinks that they tracked them. Cindy is unsure, but what she is sure of, that this is bad for them. For now, the survivors are holed up in an abandoned gas station. When Stan and Cindy return from scouting, they warn the rest of the group that they're still being followed by Horsecock, and Cindy orders the group to pack up. The cross nearby makes this place too dangerous to linger around. They take a moment to check their radios, and Cindy, ever watchful over Patrick, keeps him close as they set out. She now chooses to travel via road instead of traveling through the terrain, reasoning that despite being dangerous, it'll get them to the mountains faster and make the trail harder to follow. Asks the rest of the group if they think that they came all this way just for them. Brett, half joking, asks what they did to make them so angry. Kelly sarcastically responds saying, "Let's just say we didn't oblige them much." Thomas is astonished that while traveling through the desert, they've they've barely seen any other forms of life, and now it turns out that the first forms of life they encountered are crossed. Thomas accidentally swears here and Cindy says language. Thomas says, sorry Patrick. Patrick replies, it's okay. While traveling at night on the road, the group spots lights from a distance. Cindy gives Stan a little hypothetical. What would Stan do if he were in the place of their hunters, Horsecock's group? Stan says, just blow up the gas station for fun. Cindy says maybe, or maybe they'll use the light from the gas station to search nearby for their prey. But in reality, Horsecock's group lit the fire to light another cross on fire, just in time for dinner. And while we're being shown this, all of a sudden Stump, the one with the super hearing, hears Stan's group. I guess he really does have super hearing, because they're quite a distance away from Cindy and Stan's group. And when Cindy and Stan do see the lights approach them, they panic and then they set out again. When we revisit our survivors, it's been 2 days ever since they saw the fires. With little sleep and less water, Stan thinks of Thomas's earlier talk of fate, how that vision of not dying of dehydration is starting to fill in. Brett tries needling Kelly about her blindness, wondering if her other senses have sharpened. Her answer, not much. Thomas adds in a sarcastic comment, are you certain you can't smell bullshit? Brett, undeterred, speculates about how they're being tracked, suggesting Stump's super hearing is the key to it all. Cindy doubts it, saying any decent tracker could follow them, and Stump's ears are only useful up close. While they continue walking, Brett torments Stan with the remark that Horsecock once said. Stan looks a little disgruntled by this remark, and Cindy says, you used to torment Joel, so Stan here gets a taste of his own medicine. And now traveling across a very shallow river before things go horribly wrong. Thomas wonders how exactly did Stump get his super hearing? Was it due to his limbs getting cut off and him adapting to it? Kelly adds in, there's just some things about Crossed we're never going to understand. Stan radios over to Brett, who's watching their rear from a vantage point. After mocking Stan, he tells them to hurry up. He doesn't want to be there any longer than he has to be. And then all of a sudden, a group of Crossed appear, firing shots at the group while they're traveling through the shallow river. Brett jumps off from the cliff. Gunfire shreds through the river. Kittrick is hit. Kelly's backpack takes a bullet meant for her, and poor Patrick is swept away by the river. Cindy tries to reach him, but Stan pulls her focus to getting to shore first. The group scatters under fire, Cindy swearing and firing back in anger. When the group does reach the shore, Thomas and Kelly tend to Kittrick's injuries, which are very minor. However, Cindy is more focused on getting back Patrick. She rushes to a vantage point with Stan following her. Stan reassures her that Patrick is a clever kid. He's smart. He knows to find a place to stay until the group can reach him. However, Cindy completely ignores Stan. Thomas bandages up Kittrick, telling him that they know they can pick them off, and if they do try to attack again, they'll probably wait until after dark, and that the Crossed are learning again, making them more dangerous than ever. Brett finally returns, and of course, in Brett fashion, he's complaining. Stan mockingly tells him no one gives a shit, and then out of nowhere, the radio begins chattering. It's Horsecock's voice, saying that he has their kid. Brett tells him he must have dropped his radio during the river attack. Stan again tells him to shut up. Horsecock says that they're doing a lot of gross things to him, which makes Cindy obviously very angry. Before Sydney can do anything, Kittrick begins talking to Horsecock on the radio, saying that if he does got Patrick, he'll put him on. A moment of silence passes before Horsecock says that they killed him. Kittrick knows that Horsecock is lying, and knows that they don't have Patrick. Kittrick then threatens to wipe them out if they don't leave the desert. Stan is impressed by what Kittrick just did, and just as they're about to go set out to go look for Patrick, Brett spots a group of Cross traveling the river. Stragglers from Horsecock's group. Kittrick and Cindy go rush in after the Crossed to go get some sweet revenge. Stan feels something break loose inside of him. Weeks of running, of leaving people behind. Weeks of being prey. Not this time. Stan was sick of giving up on his humanity, and someone was going to get it, but good. The group fires at the Cross, taking them out very swiftly. Then after the gunfire subsides, Cindy sees him, sees Patrick alive. She runs to him, but when he turns, the cross-shaped rash is there. His words are like venom as he calls Sydney a cunt. Her rifle comes up almost without thought. The shot drops him. Stan stares frozen as she stands over her son's dead body. energy, expression unreadable. Thomas and Kelly arrive to the scene. Kelly asks what is happening. Thomas tells her he'll explain later. Brett, still himself, asks if she's going to bury him. Stan answers for her. She won't even want to look at him. The group heads north. Horsecock's laughter echoes through the radio. Cindy walks ahead, silent and alone. Issue 8 opens with the group still reeling in from Patrick's death. It's pouring rain and everyone looks absolutely miserable. Well, more than before at least. Thomas, trying to lighten the mood, says, well, at least we don't have to watch our language anymore. And he immediately regrets it. It's a joke in really bad taste. Cindy walks ahead in silence, distancing herself, while the rest trail behind. Stan, Thomas, Kelly, Kittrick, Stan's dog, and Stan's least favorite person in the whole entire world, Brett. Kelly tries to see some good in the situation, pointing out that the rain will make it harder to track their footprints. Brett quickly shoots that down, saying that if Horsecock's group can track them through the desert, they can track them through the rain. Their situation only worsens when they reach a flooded river. Crossing it could mean pneumonia, and without medicine, that's a death sentence. And not long after, the group does find some shelter, a wrecked military helicopter. Cindy, for a quick moment, snaps back into her hardened survivalist mode, making sure the area is clear with her gun, then retreats even deeper into herself once the adrenaline fades. After finally getting settled in, Kelly quietly worries about Cindy's health, saying she hasn't eaten or even changed her clothes. Thomas warns her off, saying that if anyone goes within 10 yards of her, they're going to get their throat taken out. Meanwhile, Brett is playing around with a rifle he found on the helicopter. Stan reminds him to take his finger off the trigger. Stan's dog gravitates toward Brett. Brett isn't really much of a fan of the dog, unlike Patrick. And when Brett asks Stan, why does your dog have an interest in me all of a sudden? Stan replies, bad taste. And then a little argument breaks out between the two. As usual, Brett insists he's at least trying to stay positive, while Stan wallows in misery, even taunting Stan about never getting to sleep with Sydney. The tension nearly boils over, until Kittrick points out that the gun has a grenade launcher attachment, and Brett could get them all killed if he's careless. Stan, suspicious of how Kittrick knows that, asks him if he was in the military. Kittrick just responds with, my cousin. Moments later, Stan begins to search through the wreckage of the helicopter. He only finds a rusty knife, some trash, and finally a Bible. He finds it on the body of a long dead soldier. But inside the Bible are handwritten confessions from Captain Michael Alexander of the US Army. Through his notes, Stan and us learn about a secret military mission at the start of the outbreak. Captain Michael's unit was ordered to escort scientists to California nuclear power plants at Diablo Canyon and San Onofre, ensuring they were shut down to prevent massive disaster. But when they arrived at both sites, they were already crawling with frost, and despite that, they did manage to successfully pull off their mission. And in between flying from place to place, the scientists bickered over reactor mechanics, while the captain admitted he had no clue what they were actually talking about. The captain describes the scientists bickering as if they were children. On a stopover at Fallon Naval Station, his group learned how badly the world had collapsed. Bases were gone, major cities overrun. But the real horror came when the captain revealed the second part of their mission: eliminate the scientists. The logic was cruel. If they ever turned into Crossed, their retained memories could allow them to restart the plants, a risk command couldn't take. The captain admits he carried out the order quickly, then questioned what kind of fear drove his superiors to such paranoia. Soon after, his helicopter went down in a storm over the desert, both legs shattered. He ordered his crew to leave him behind, writing his final words in the Bible as he awaited death, reflecting that maybe killing those scientists made him a good soldier. Maybe his death won't go in vain, as well as those sacrifices of the scientists. Cindy's group leaves the wreck after the storm passes and pushes northwest. A week drags by. Cindy, still silent and depressed, refusing food and sleep. Stan reflects grimly that maybe this is just how things will be from now on. While camping on a hill, tensions explode. Brett kicks Stan's dog for bothering him during a meal. Thomas and Kelly say what the heck, telling him it's just a hungry animal, but Brett keeps at it, kicking the dog again and telling Stan fuck you when warned to stop. Without hesitation, Stan shoots Brett in the head, calm and unshaken. He puts his gun away while Kelly stammers in shock. Thomas reassures her it's okay. Kittrick barely reacts and Cindy simply watches. For 2 more days, the group travels in silence, everyone weighed down by Stan's execution of Brett. Finally, Stan approaches Cindy with an idea to go back and bury Patrick. Feeling inspired by Captain Michael's Bible journal entries, he tells her that what makes them human isn't survival at all costs, but their regret, their guilt, the very things that separate them from the crossed. He confesses that killing Brett didn't disturb him, and that frightens him. Cindy, who had killed her own son, has become like a ghost. Stan believes that by burying Patrick, they can both reclaim some humanity. Cindy first brushes him off, but later she silently agrees. Stan shares the plan with Thomas, who praises him for doing the right thing. After saying goodbye to the group, Stan reflects on everyone he's met, friends or just survivors bound by circumstance. He admits that if the virus never happened, they'd all have gone their separate ways at the diner, but he also foreshadows that this won't be the last time he sees Thomas. However, it is the way he likes to remember him. The last issue opens with Stan and Cindy finally returning to the riverbank where Patrick died. Stan is horrified by how decomposed the bodies have become, but he carefully gathers Patrick's remains, wrapping them in a blanket. He suggests they bury him on a ridge overlooking the river, and Cindy, trying to fight back her tears, agrees. She does the digging herself, burying her son while Stan stands guard. When she finishes, she breaks down in silence. After she gathers herself, she confesses or reveals her past to Stan. It was her grandfather who taught her how to use guns. No secret agent background or origin story. He was old-fashioned and thought that women ought to protect themselves. And Cindy, ironically enough, says that she married an asshole who was very abusive towards her. But once he was out of the picture, she made sure to protect Patrick to the fullest, to the best of her abilities. She had to teach herself the discipline for not getting lazy or not getting comfortable, to always stay on the grind. And finally, she says that's all there is to me, there's no mystery. That night, Stan and Cindy take shelter in a church, where a corpse is nailed to the cross inside. There is a little bit of symbolism here. This whole entire mission of burying Patrick was basically an attempt to get back their humanity. After doing really morally gray actions, such as killing the cannibal kids, and Stan just shooting Brett out of nowhere for kicking his dog. It's like they're being reborn again doing this personal mission. Cindy thanks Stan for convincing her to bury Patrick, but says all her efforts feel wasted. Everything she did to keep him safe, every precaution, even the slaughter of the school children. She curses the world for being such a cruel joke. Stan doesn't agree. He insists it wasn't wasted because they're still alive. They decide they'll take the corpse down from the cross in the morning. Small human acts to keep themselves from becoming like the crossed. And there's also some really in-your-face symbolism here. Crossed and on the cross. And now we check in on Thomas, Kelly, and Kittrick. They've gone over a month without Stan and Cindy. Thomas imagines that at any moment he'll hear Cindy saying 2 minutes, as she usually says when she tells the group to get ready to move on. However, he's more uncomfortable with her not being around. He guesses he's not very alpha. However, Kittrick has some grim news to share with Thomas and Kelly. He says they're behind us. Thomas says Stan and Cindy, no. It looks like Horsecock's crew has been following them. Deciding he's had enough of everything, Kittrick volunteers to buy them time, admitting he lost his will to live long ago. He tells Thomas and Kelly to keep running to get some distance while he stays behind. Kittrick kneels on the ground, hiding his pistol and waits. Horsecock's crew arrives, face carrying the ever grotesque stump, and they open fire immediately. Kittrick takes a bullet, but manages to put a few shots into them, cursing while he's doing it. But he's quickly overwhelmed. For a quick moment, we see Stan, Cindy, and his dog. They hear the shooting. However, they're not close enough to intervene. And now returning back to Kittrick, he's had his arm sliced off by Face. Face then moves in to desecrate Kittrick, but is stopped by Horsecock. But Horsecock is more interested on getting the other survivors and doesn't want to waste any time. Thomas and Kelly continue running in a panic as Stan and Cindy run run in their direction. Returning to Thomas and Kelly, the two of them take cover behind a fallen tree. Thomas warns Kelly that they have to stay completely silent, no breathing, no moving, or else Stump with his super hearing will find them. Some cross stragglers pass by, but luckily they don't notice the survivors. An hour goes by, Thomas checks his watch, and Kelly reminds him that Cindy would have made them wait 2 hours, so they decide to hold out a little longer. When they finally move again, they make their way toward a cliff. Thomas tells Kelly that if he lets go of her hand, she needs to be extra careful. As they walk, the two begin planning their next move. Thomas says they should head west and avoid going north for at least a week, but Kelly quickly corrects him. If they head west, they'll be trapped between the ocean and any threat. Instead, their next rendezvous point is northeast, and before they can finish that conversation, they're ambushed. Thomas is struck by Horsecock's signature weapon, sending him to the ground and breaking his glasses. Horsecock grabs Kelly, choking her, taunting her, asking where Four Eyes and Mommy are, laughing maniacally as he waves his weapon in her face. Thomas, half blind without his glasses, refuses to give up. Through gritted teeth, he shouts, "What the fuck are you laughing at, asshole?" before lunging at Horsecock and biting a chunk out of his neck. As Horsecock bleeds out, Kelly manages to grab the pistol that fell during the ambush. Thomas steadies her and helps her aim at Stump, who was being carried by Horsecock after he smacked down Face. And with one shot, she blows his head clean off. But it's not over yet. The blood in Thomas's mouth means infection, and he knows it. Coughing up blood, he tells Kelly she has to run. Kelly, devastated, pleads with him instead, begging Thomas to shoot her, telling him he can escape, that she loves him, and that he's done enough. Thomas, already fighting the sea virus, tells her he'll never leave her, his sweet little sister. The infection burns through him like venom, but in a brief moment of clarity, he holds her shoulders and reassures her, "Sweetie, we're nearly there." From a distance, Stan and Cindy watch as Thomas and Kelly run together toward the cliff, chased by Crossed. And instead of letting the monsters decide their fate, the two make their choice, to go out together on their own terms. With Thomas, Kelly, and Kittrick gone, the group has been reduced to just Stan, Cindy, and the dog. Devastated, Stan grieves silently, petting his dog while Cindy focuses on revenge. She doesn't want to wait for Horsecock stragglers to regroup. If Horsecock could organize a group of Crossed, other Crossed could learn from him and mimic that act, and she doesn't want to risk any of that. I guess you can say Cindy doesn't want to imagine a world full of Horsecocks. With Stump, basically the early warning system for the Crossed gone, she sees her chance. While scouting, Cindy spots Face, trying to rally what's left of the Crossed. She tells Stan to take him out. Back when this all started, Stan was a terrible shot, but under Cindy's guidance, he's become even better than her. As he lines up his rifle, Stan finds himself thinking about evil itself. He remembers the old urban legend of snuff films, movies where someone was actually murdered on camera. Not just a staged horror movie, but something real, with a narrative built around an actual death. He thought that the phrase, "there is no such thing as a snuff movie," was bullshit. Someone thought of it, someone tried it, and once the idea was out there, it became currency, and eventually someone really did it. That's the truth of the Crossed. They aren't supernatural. They aren't some great cosmic mystery. Everything they do has already been done by the worst parts of humanity. The Crossed are every sadist, every torturer, every serial killer, every terrorist, every corrupt politician, every abusive parent, magnified 1,000 times over. Stan and Cindy head out into the field of dead Crossed, where they find Face bleeding out. With his last words, he mutters that it was going to be beautiful. Maybe he meant a world built by the Crossed, but thanks to Cindy and Stan, that vision died with him. Stan ends Face's life, finally bringing an end to Horsecock's group. The threat that's haunted them for what feels like forever. The massacre is finally over. Cindy and Stan walk through the chilling air, stealing just a few seconds of rest before moving again. Stan knows he'll never have an answer for what really caused the Crossed, and neither will we. Even if there was one, would it matter now? Stan thinks to himself, what waits for them now? More intelligent Crossed? Some form of redemption for all they've done? Could there be redemption for murdering children? Or after Stan murdering Brett just for kicking a dog? Those questions will haunt him for the rest of his life, or at least until Alaska. One thing is certain, the frozen earth beneath his feet. As Stan and Cindy press forward into the wilderness, they hold hands, walking into the unknown with the dog. So now that we finally reached the end of Garth Ennis' original Crossed, what did you think? Honestly, rereading this for the second time, especially after checking out some later entries in the series, I'm glad I can compare them, because this first run definitely stands out for good reasons. However, I do think Crossed Wish You Were Here is better than this. The characters here are what make it work. Kelly and Thomas, you really want to see them win. Ever since the night at the diner, he's always taken care of her no matter what, calling her sweetie and reassuring her through every horror they face. And the final moment when he calls her sister before they fall to their deaths hits especially hard. I think they're characters you can really get attached to, and I'm glad they were included in the story. Story-wise, it's not groundbreaking. It's basically a road trip through an apocalyptic America. The shock value is off the charts sometimes fitting to show how absurd the Crossed are, but it's definitely over the top edginess. Jeff's twist, for example, just felt like salt in the wound. But at its core, this story is about clinging to your humanity in a world where humanity is gone. And watching Stan and Cindy persevere is what makes it worth reading, even if we've seen that theme before in other apocalyptic stories. What does make Crossed stand out are the so-and-so zombies themselves, or the Crossed. Only Garth Ennis would throw homicidal maniacs with horsecock weapons, or cum-covered bullets into the mix. And yet, compared to later entries in the series, this volume actually feels tame. Future Crossed stories lean so hard into edginess they become laughable, with the one exception being Crossed Wish You Were Here, which I know I said before, but I'd rank it above the original. And that's a series I would love to cover on this channel if this video somehow does well. After this first volume wrapped up, Ennis basically opened the floodgates for more writers to add their own takes on this demented universe. But like I said, a lot of them just don't live up to what Ennis started here. This was my first ever attempt at trying to do a comic overview in a long video format. And I really do hope you find some enjoyability out of this video. And I'll be honest, this video was kind of rushed compared to my last video. And yeah, we'll be revisiting this universe and possibly covering even more comics depending on how well this video does. Anyways, I do have another video game video planned for my next entry on my YouTube channel. So if you're here for that kind of content, make sure to like and subscribe. And anyways, this has been Keeney's, and I'll see you all later.
I need someone to help me, I'm living in hell. I wish I was more healthy and I help myself. I need someone around me.